I approach these topics with great seriousness. This isn't clickbait, but a necessary analysis. Linux is and remains a system that protects our data, that doesn't spy on us, at least in 99.5% of cases. But calling it a digital fortress, as we often hear, is a bit exaggerated. I don't like the urban legends on which part of our community has built an almost mythological image of Linux, because the truth is that these narratives don't help anyone. They are the worst enemies of Linux's well-being and credibility. A serious system needs serious users, credible, acceptable in every way, even by those coming from proprietary systems. And this is precisely the most important aspect. Not blind faith, but awareness. Let's start from the beginning. Linux is a system of trust. It's not made by companies that need to monetize data, but by developers obsessed with transparency, respect for the user, and their freedom. And by users, like many of us, equally obsessed with privacy, independence, and control of their own data. Everything is open, public, verifiable, and inserting something that spies within this ecosystem is not impossible, but it's extremely difficult. This is what makes Linux unique. So yes, Linux is a safer island in an increasingly invasive digital world, but saying it's a perfect paradise, an impenetrable fortress, would be naive, because some clouds in Linux's sky do exist. Data collection in Linux exists, and it hasn't always been transparent. Let's go back to 2012. Canonical introduced the famous shopping lens in Ubuntu Unity, a feature that sent local searches to Canonical servers, and from there to Amazon to show products. Richard Stallman called it spyware. After years of controversy, Canonical removed it in 2018. And then there's Deepin Linux, the so-called Chinese Ubuntu. In 2018, automatic connections to tracker.deepin.cn were discovered every time the store was opened. The developers explained it was just download telemetry, then published the code and removed it. But the reputation that has never fully recovered. Manjaro and EndeavourOS also send an anonymous ping at first boot to count installations. Not malicious, but without opt-in, a detail many don't like. The real gray area, however, comes with commercial distributions. Ubuntu, Linspire, and similar, based on Ubuntu, but with proprietary components, closed updates, and poorly documented security telemetry. There, transparency stops and it's no longer possible to verify what really happens. Zorin OS, in paid versions, uses private servers for activation. Pop! OS collects anonymous statistics on the store. Nothing serious, but worth knowing. The great exceptions remain Debian, Fedora, and OpenSUSE. Completely open systems, with telemetry disabled by default and always opt-in. Since 2018, Ubuntu asks the user, at first boot, if they want to share some hardware information. It's optional, but many click yes without thinking. Actually, Ubuntu uses various tools to collect data. Some send hardware statistics, others report application crashes. Fedora does something similar to count active systems and to manage error reports, but only with your consent. The justification is always the same: improve user experience, fix bugs, optimize performance. All true, but the point remains, is it really necessary? And where does the line end between diagnostics and profiling? If you want to know exactly which tools to disable and how to do it in your distribution, I'll leave you a complete guide in the description. Because each system has its technical names, but the principle is always the same: control what leaves your computer. Behind the convenience of modern package managers hides a more complex system than it seems. APT doesn't collect data, but popularity contest is available as an option. DNF uses CountMe. The Snap Store records installations and updates linked to a device ID. Flatpak and FlatHub collect download statistics. Many software centers maintain local histories to improve recommendations. Each installation contributes, even minimally, to building a usage profile. And this, in itself, is already behavioral data. And then we get to the sore point: third-party applications. Chrome, Discord, Spotify, Steam. These are software that use your same user privileges. They can access files, communicate with their servers, include trackers. There's no need for conspiracies. It all works in a perfectly legal way. If you don't use sandboxes, separate profiles, or limited permissions, they collect a lot. Flatpak with portals or FireJail can reduce the attack surface, but they don't replace discipline. Privacy isn't an extension, it's a practice. And let's not just talk about apps. In 2020, some Chrome extensions like Web of Trust were discovered selling browsing data to third parties. They had access to every page visited, every form filled out, every search made. Millions of users unknowingly transformed into products. Not even Mozilla is immune. In 2017, Firefox started collecting telemetry by default. Despite being a respectable and open project, many users felt betrayed. Here too, it wasn't spying, but lack of clarity. Browser extensions, then, represent an enormous risk. Many, even apparently harmless ones, collect browsing data, history, even page contents. The extension ecosystem has become a goldmine for free surveillance. The almost absolute trust we have in the open-source software supply chain can be a threat, perhaps the most powerful within our ecosystem. And the story of XZUtils proves it in a disturbing way. In March 2024, a very sophisticated backdoor was discovered inside XZUtils, a compression library used practically everywhere in Linux. It wasn't a random bug, it was a premeditated attack, lasting years. A malicious actor had gained the trust of the original maintainer, became co-maintainer, and had inserted malicious code hidden in apparently innocent test files. The backdoor would have allowed remote unauthenticated access via SSH on millions of systems. It was discovered by pure chance by a Microsoft engineer who noticed an anomalous slowdown during SSH logins. If it hadn't been for that extra fraction of a second, the backdoor would have entered Debian, Ubuntu, Fedora in production on servers around half the world. This demonstrates one fundamental thing. Open code is more secure, yes, but it's not automatically secure. It requires people to check it, time to verify it, skills to understand it. And when trust transforms into blind faith, even open source can betray us. That's why don't leave your personal data, your passwords, your documents inside your Linux distribution thinking they're safe. They're not. They're not 100% safe. I always create an encrypted folder and try to put my most sensitive files there. Not out of paranoia, but out of awareness. The question is, how are we informed about all this? The truth is that most users aren't at all. Ubuntu shows a pop-up during installation. Fedora explains it in the documentation, but how many actually read privacy policies written in vague legal language? Canonical says data is used to improve products, but doesn't specify how long it's kept or with whom it's shared. On Ubuntu, you can disable telemetry, but not choose which fields to send. And be careful. Anonymization is not a guarantee. Timestamps, IP addresses, and rare hardware combinations are enough to make re-identification possible. Not to mention that data managed by UK or US companies are subject to legal requests and warrants. Anonymity, when it enters the wrong hands, can dissolve in an instant. Many Linux users believe I use Linux, therefore I'm invisible. It's an illusion. As Edward Snowden says, you don't need the contents, metadata is enough. Your usage habits, update times, crash reports, everything builds a behavioral portrait. The problem is cultural. We've built an identity around the idea of being the aware ones, the privacy-conscious ones, but identity without verification becomes complacency, and complacency is the first step toward vulnerability. The trend is clear. Data collection will increase. There are already discussions about introducing direct telemetry into System D. Every time controversies explode, but the pressure to improve systems never stops. Flatpak and FlatHub are expanding their analytics, and the next step is AI integration into Linux desktops. Intelligent assistants that will know our habits, apps used, work times, even opened files, all to improve user experience. As Linux also conquers IoT and smart devices, privacy boundaries thin out. Each device becomes a node in a connected ecosystem, and the effectiveness of individual defenses decreases. Privacy from an implicit right risks becoming a premium feature. The good news is that the solution exists, and it's called awareness. Always check what's being sent. On Ubuntu, disable Ubuntu report and whoopsie. On Fedora, disable count me. On Debian, make sure popularity contest isn't active. Check the permissions of every app on Snap and Flatpak. Reduce browser extensions to a minimum and disable all telemetry in Firefox. Perform regular network monitoring with tools like Netstat or Wireshark. And if you're looking for a higher level of anonymity, there are distros like Tails and Cubes OS designed for this purpose. Tails for total anonymity, Cubes for absolute isolation. Choose based on your threat model. Linux is freer, more honest, more controllable than any other operating system, but it's not infallible. Freedom, if not accompanied by awareness, becomes illusion. Privacy is not a setting, it's a habit. It requires vigilance, information, and choice. In my recent videos on System D, some users didn't grasp the seriousness of such a pervasive system, underestimating it and seeing only its more or less excellent functioning as a quality. But System D is not just an init system. It's an ecosystem that manages boot, logs, network, DNS, user sessions, containers. It's everywhere. And precisely for this reason, it represents a critical point for privacy. Already today, Systemd Journal collects an enormous amount of information about the system, and there are open discussions about the possibility of integrating direct telemetry inside Systemd itself. Think about it. A component present in 90% of Linux distributions with permanent root access that could send diagnostic data to improve the ecosystem. I'm not saying it will happen, nor that it would necessarily be malicious, but the centralization of power, even in an open source project, creates attack surfaces and data collection opportunities that didn't exist before. Trust in open code doesn't exempt us from vigilance on its evolution. Only in this way can we transform Linux not into an illusory fortress, but into a truly aware citadel. Because security is not a destination, it's a way of living technology. Now, this was a part of my video that will come out in the coming months on how to secure Linux. I thought it would be useful to include in this video the part about creating an encrypted folder for protecting our sensitive data. It seems obvious to me that, as good practice, you shouldn't leave your most precious and delicate files scattered around the desktop. Personal photos, compromising photos, things you particularly care about, passwords, access credentials, backups, everything that can be used against you to compromise your personal or economic life must be guarded with extreme care. I'd say almost obsessive care. Concentrating all these things inside a single encrypted folder, I believe, is a much safer practice than keeping them free inside your work system, which I assume is not at all as secure as you think. And if you have doubts about this, you can watch my video, Linux is Not Secure. Here's how to create this encrypted folder, step by step. There's also a written version on my website, so you can find the full procedure there. Now I'll list the steps here on screen. First, we install eCryptFS, which is the encryption system integrated into the Linux kernel. Lightweight, reliable, and completely open source. We type, if you're using Debian or Ubuntu, sudo apt install eCryptUtils. Once it's installed, we can create the structure of our vault with two folders, one that will store the encrypted data and another that will show the decrypted files once the vault is mounted. Now we can mount the vault for the first time. This is the step where eCryptFS will ask us a few questions to configure encryption. Just type. At this point, eCryptFS will ask you which encryption algorithm to use. Just choose AES. It's the standard and the most secure option for most users. Then it will ask for the key length. Enter 32 for a 256-bit encryption key, which offers the best balance between performance and strength. Next, it will ask whether you want to encrypt file names. Type yes to confirm, so even the names of your files will be protected and unreadable from the outside. Finally, it will ask you to set a passphrase, which is the password that unlocks your vault. Choose something strong because this is what protects all your data. After confirming the options, the encrypted file system will be mounted, and the folder private will now act as your vault. Everything you put inside will be automatically encrypted and hidden in folder.safereal. The first folder is the encrypted one and stays hidden, while the second is the visible one and behaves like a normal directory. Remember that when you reach the later steps and repeat this operation, eCryptFS will ask you the same questions every time you mount the vault. If you don't answer exactly the same way as during the first setup, your files will not be visible, and that's normal. In a way, This works as an additional layer of protection, but I'm telling you this to save you from panicking when your files suddenly disappear. They're still there, encrypted and safely stored inside the hidden folder Safe Real. You can list them from the terminal, but their names will be unreadable, and you won't be able to open them until you mount the vault again with the same configuration. Now we create the script that will take care of mounting it. We edit with nano in the terminal. This script mounts the vault as root using eCryptFS, and immediately after returns ownership of the files to the user, so that programs like Dolphin or Nautilus can see them normally. Now we also create the script to unmount it safely with lazy unmount, as usual with edit with nano this file. We also save this and make it executable in this way. At this point we can already mount the vault with this command and unmount it with this, but we want to make everything more convenient and integrated into the desktop, so we add two icons in the GNOME menu, one to open and one to close. For the mounting one, we edit with nano this file and paste this code to create an icon in the menu. Then for the unmounting one, this file, and we paste this text. Once both files are saved, we update the cache with. Now opening the GNOME menu, we'll find two new entries, one called Mount Safe and one called Unmount Safe. Clicking on Mount Safe, the vault will be opened. The system will ask us for the encryption password, and the private folder will immediately become accessible with our files in clear. When we've finished working, we can click on Unmount Safe, and the vault will be automatically closed with lazy unmount, even if it was still in use. Don't delude yourselves even with this. Be careful. I created the mount-unmount icons precisely to make the process fast, but the folder must remain invisible most of the time. It should be opened only to move or consult files, and then immediately closed. Do it possibly by disconnecting the internet connection, because if your system were compromised, some program could still access and steal your data. It's a rare eventuality, but possible. And you see, to reach 100% security takes a lot, a whole lot, and it's not within the possibilities of the normal user. Neither yours nor mine. Thanks for watching. I hope I was helpful in making your digital data a little safer and more secure.